Okay, here we go with phase 2 or part 2 of alchemy, and my goal was to try to condense this into much more smaller digestible lecture, and I failed, so I'm going to go ahead and do it fairly deep, but I'm going to try to do it quickly. I will try to do it slowly and quickly, if that makes any sense. And the goal is to get through all this material, but I want to stay on point and hopefully not talk too fast. So we left off at talking about how all of us are in this phase of development, every single being on earth, 8 billion, and all the people who lived before us, and these are the 7 stages. Everyone's going through this. It's part of what makes it fair. One of my favorite examples is to consider the nature of a rose seed and how a rose seed is destined to become a rose bush. That's what it's designed to do. It doesn't become a stalk of wheat or a pumpkin, okay? It's going to become a rose. Each of us was born with a little seed, so to speak. You could call it Christ, you could also call it Buddha or Krishna or whatever you want to call it. You were born with a seed of spirit inside of yourself. And it's going to develop. It has to develop. It can't not develop. And you have all of eternity to develop it. Like Course in Miracles says, the only thing you can control is the time it takes for you to develop it. But part of the time it takes is it's helpful to recognize the stage that you're in. It's also very helpful to recognize the next stage and the next stage. Sort of like 2nd grade, anticipate 3rd grade, and then 4th grade, and then what does college look like? That's useful. And so there's very specific stages. Go back and watch the first one if you want to get some more depth on these concepts, okay? The actual alchemy. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit more about the experience of these concepts, okay? And some of the words I used, different rhymes like they did over here, the rhymes that I use that make it mental health and addiction related, because that's what I work with on a regular basis. And it is a process that everyone's in. It's another reason why the world is fair. So as I go through all of this, I want to touch on most of this. This is called the Great Work in alchemy. And the great work is to work yourself towards this place where you realize the Philosopher's Stone. At the end, I'm going to talk about what I believe the Philosopher's Stone to be. But in essence, it's awakening. Alchemy says the word Philosopher's Stone, sort of throws you off the scent because a lot of people are looking for a physical thing, and it's not a physical thing. It might be. We'll do that at the end. But the great work is working yourself to a place where you have this great ability to philosophize correctly, if you will. Great clarity. And that stone, if you will, comes with it the experience of samadhi. Okay? Remember, linking everything together, it's all one. All these religions and philosophies all united. It's the perennial philosophy. The goal of alchemy is to get you into samadhi lake, which the Buddha taught is the center of all of our consciousness, if you will. It's why Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is inside of you. Okay? So all of us have this. It exists in everyone. It's just a matter of how much you've developed it. And if you don't develop it, guess what? The universe will for you. And you either make the choice to go ahead and work with it yourself, that's called the path of light, or in Kabbalah, or you don't make the path of light choice, and then the universe forces you through it. That's called the path of pain. Which one sounds more pleasant? Once you know what these steps are, path of light is walk the steps. The path of pain is to refuse the steps, but what rose seed gets to refuse its development? Ultimately, we're the ones that get to put ourselves in certain environments, like this one, for example, like-minded people. That's why we call it Sangha, right? And that can further your growth. But if you refuse to participate in such a thing and you just want to argue about right and wrong all the time, then you're not going to really nurture your seed very well, okay? And so here we go with the process of, we'll call it seed nurturing, and diving a little bit deeper into this, the concepts of alchemy. So here we go. Everyone is in these phases one way or another. In many ways, I like to think of it as puberty. That when people haven't reached puberty yet, they're not developed to, go on and procreate and do adult-like things, okay? If you haven't reached puberty yet, you're still stuck in childhood. Many people, including us, for much of our lives, are stuck in childhood. We haven't even reached the spiritual phase. It's why Apostle Paul talks about going beyond the elementary teachings of Christ into maturity. So a lot of people have barely reached step 1 here. And when we talk about what step 1 is, a lot of people haven't really gone through much adversity. You could call them rich people in some ways, as Jesus would talk about. It's the people who have gone through adversity that are blessed because they're on this journey. But if your life is so good that you're not even interested in this and you think you found the right prophet because you were born in the right part of the world and because you were told that you picked the right team and you're good to go, you haven't even got to stage 1. But for people who are interested, they've reached what I call spiritual puberty. Now we've got the calcination phase, which is endurance. So we're going to dive a little deeper. What is this phase? This is the phase of the massive ego challenges. This is chaos. This is when your life is really messy. This is Buddha's stage 1. Life is suffering. You're going to suffer. Your life was great until it wasn't. You know, maybe in childhood something bad happened, or maybe you were great till 25, but then something bad happened. But something bad's going to happen. And then the suffering is going to start. And it's inevitable, says the Buddha. You're going to suffer. Just like the rose seed has to go through a phase which includes some thorns, you're going to suffer, and your job is to endure it. What does this phase look like? In many ways, it's the dark night of the soul. It's when you go through something so painful that you sort of get forced to look in another direction. Maybe I'm not this ego self. Maybe I'm something deeper than that. Maybe I'm an eternal spiritual being. The calcination/endurance phase sort of forces that on you. Because sometimes there's no other way out, especially if there's a tragedy, like a loved one dies in a tragic fashion, and you want to try to connect somehow. Well, good luck doing that physically. You have to do it spiritually. Or a trauma happens to you, and you have resentment towards other beings, you know, which is very understandable. But the only way out of that type of resentment is through forgiveness, which is decidedly spiritual. And again, bad things happen. And as the bad things happen to you, you are pressured, if you will, into having an experience that allows you to make a choice. Now, what happens in that, this pain, this endurance, that you have to get through this, what surfaces dissolution is the ignoring phase, which again, just rhymes nicely. But what is it we're supposed to ignore? That voice inside your head that keeps saying, this is bad. I don't trust it. I wish it didn't happen. This shouldn't be like it is. Well, that's not how the universe rolls. And if you're going to believe in God and all the different things God could mean, well, you might as well believe that God is fair. And there's a very fair process that everyone has to go through. And to resist that keeps you stuck in calcination. It keeps you stuck in the pain phase. You know, imagine someone does something bad to you and you resent them forever. Do you feel any better? No, at some point you're going to have to forgive, right? Or you have impatience, right? You hate traffic jams, or you don't like long lines on Black Friday or whatever. When does impatience start to feel good? Not do you transfer it to patience, you know, then all of a sudden you're being spiritual. That starts to feel good. Love is patient. It also produces endorphins. So we have very clear, specific physical things that happen to us, and then a bunch of emotions arise. This is the fire, the burning, and then this is the water. This is Noah's Ark. This is the flood that happens to all of us. Like I said last time, but also I'm going to do more today. This is what Jesus was teaching. He was teaching alchemy, and then he walked the path. He showed us the path, and we're going to refer to a lot of Bible verses throughout this as well. But so as we get into the dissolution phase, the key to this is to experience emotion, but to trust it. It's my favorite therapeutic word, really, trust things. Your emotions are guides. You know, when I do my addiction work, we call emotions the GPS. It's a guide. It's teaching you where to go. You know, if you have a stressor because there's a fire, you know, smoke over there, that stress, the fear, the anxiety makes you go in another direction. Or, you know, maybe you have some heart, chest pains. You know, you call a doctor. Pain forces you to grow in a different direction, doesn't it? Well, your emotions are perfect. They might not be pleasant, but your emotions are teaching you how to get to unity eventually. Because if we resent and resist and we don't love our enemies, of course, we're not at peace. Eventually, we learn how to look at it different. And so this phase is the phase of learning how to trust. If we don't trust in this phase, we circle back and we go through some more pain. It doesn't just clear up on its own. And there's no drug that takes care of this. As we're going to talk about down here, specific teachers of alchemy say drugs can't take you to the finish line. Nothing physical can take you to the finish line. Your personal experience can, though. And you have to learn how to look at things different. So the dissolution or the ignoring phase, it requires you to not direct your negative energy at other people. And this is where we get tripped up all the time. We love to blame, right? You're the cause of my pain. Nope, the universe knows what it's doing. I mean, where did Jesus walk around whining about the people causing him pain? Not at all, ever. All he did was forgive, and he loved back. And that guy got through this phase. And he got to this phase, and he got the Philosopher's Stone, for sure. And all the various prophets did it in their own way. And they all tell us the same thing. You got to walk the walk that I walked. And it's not blaming others. There's that Chinese proverb. You'll see that. I've said it here before. It's this. We're all on the same journey. Those who blame others haven't started. Those who blame themselves are halfway home. Those who blame no one have arrived. See, there's no role for blame in the spiritual process. It doesn't work. It just keeps you stuck, and it keeps you stuck in pain. Now, we're not talking about giving up physical world goals and like working with things like politics and relationships and helping people learn and grow, and what are good ideas as humans. That's important. We don't get rid of that. What we're doing is waking up the seed inside of ourselves. Because when you establish the spiritual self, now you have stability. Now you have a sense of clarity, a sense of peace, and you can still go back out in the world and do your thing, whatever that looks like. But now you're going to have good mental health while you're doing it, plus a certain salvation has come to you. And so you don't direct your negative energy at someone else. You discharge the energy elsewhere. I love to put on how trees take our carbon dioxide and turn it into oxygen. Beautiful, right? Human beings don't do that. You breathe your toxins on someone else. It's not good for them. They don't turn it back into carbon dioxide. But if you have negative energy, get out in nature. It'll take it from you, right? And it'll convert it. It'll be a higher vibration it gives back to you. That's what nature does. It's beautiful and it's peaceful. What doesn't work is when you take your negative emotion and you shoot it at someone else. Or you try to cover it up with drugs and alcohol or any number of other addictions. Doesn't work. Keeps you stuck in these phases here. So we need to trust. That's the most important part of this phase, or we stay in the samsara. We just keep circling back around and around. But once you trust, you can move into, I called it therefore because it's philosophical. You move into a phase in which you have the ability to see the distinction. Up here we had the goal, the idea of a spiritual self or the soul or consciousness or whatever, and it gets all wrapped up in the ego self, and now we have this connection that's so difficult to distinguish the difference between that which is the physical and that which is the spiritual. But in order to experience this process, in alchemy it's called solve et coagula, which is to separate and recombine. We first have to go through a separation phase where we can see the distinction between your spiritual self and your physical self. You can see the distinction between what you are eternally and what you are temporarily. Most of religion gets caught up in this stuff, and it identifies as the physical self, and that we are God's little children, and that he sees our little bodies, and we overlook the very specific teachings, like when Jesus says flesh counts for nothing. John 6:63, the flesh counts for nothing. It's the spirit that gives life. And where did God show much regard for Jesus' body after all? Look what he had to go through. It doesn't seem fair. And why does cancer and like tragedy and that kind of stuff happen throughout the world? Is it possible that God sees us not as our bodies but as our spirit? And that to be born again is when we recognize that we're spirit? And that all the physical things that we're doing, well, they ultimately don't really amount for much. No man shall boast. There's not a physical thing that you're going to do that's going to impress God. Nothing at all. It's through grace alone you're saved. And it's the realization of the spiritual self. That's it. That's it. Throughout the world. That's it. All anyone has to do. And this is where separation helps. Because you are able to sit back and philosophize and say, all right, so I'm actually sort of two things. I thought I was just Steve. But I'm this spiritual thing playing out this role called Steve. And that's separation. This phase has a lot of interesting distinctions in this. This is the ability to recognize the difference between higher self, lower self, higher vibrational states, lower vibrational states, light and dark, and why spirit is lighter than density, that we're spiritual beings that come into the physical form, and we are physically dense. We're also dense up here, aren't we? Right? And this phase includes the recognition of trauma and the issues and the things that happen to us. And here we very gently say, again, therapeutically, if I meet someone who's been victimized, the first thing that you do is meet them where they're at. And you go through what the experience was and what being a victim feels like and what the people did to you, and maybe you pursue justice and all that stuff. It's called validation. You join with people. But eventually, over time, what do we have to do? We have to learn how to let it go. We have to move on. We have to forgive. And so there's levels of growth here. You don't just go at someone right away with, oh, so your family just died in a fire? Well, there's no such thing as death. Get over it. That's way too fast, way too much, right? You join with people where they're at. This is called being a fisher of men. To meet people right where they're at. And so you can distinguish between someone who has a spiritual sense and someone who's still wrapped up in the ego. You can meet someone, as we're going to talk about next week, who might be at the very beginning versus, say, in the distillation phase, and you can tell the difference. Now you can be a good fisherman. This phase includes the idea of who am I, after all? And who are we identifying with? Our labels? Or something even deeper than that? The eternal spiritual self. Who am I? And what is it that when God was asked his name by Moses, what did God say? I am that I am, right? That's philosophical. Takes a lot of time to dive in that too. But the great I am, guess what? That's what you are too. Because we're made in God's image after all. And to settle into all of it, into the embracing of all of it, and the loving of everything, including enemies and adversity and all that, that's the great I am. And when you take that on as your persona, let that be your label, now you got it. It's also going to whip you through the phases quicker. Lots of intensity, but it'll get you through there. Anyhow, your traumas become something else. They become lessons, chance for you to learn and grow. Nothing gets past the ego better than forgiving someone, because the ego doesn't want to forgive anyone, right? The ego is petulant. It sees the world as physical. It denies all of this. Remember when Peter tried to stop Jesus from getting crucified, what did Jesus say to Peter? Satan, get behind me. Wow. Then what does Jesus say? You are focused on the affairs of man. I'm focused on the affairs of God. Well, what's the affairs of man? Looking at it physically. Well, what about the affairs of God? Unless you think God's unfair, screwing with us down here, doing a bunch of unfair stuff. Or is he meeting us where we're at? And if you embrace that phase, you can now see the distinction between what is physical and what is spiritual. At this point, once you do that, the emotions that happen in this phase start to settle down. You start to develop a certain sense of peace because you're trusting a little bit. You're like, all right, there's a method to this madness. It's where faith shows up. You're like, I don't like this, but I get it. I'm not very good at it, but I understand the point. And now the dark night of the soul has been escaped because, as St. John says, the dark night of the soul, you get put in a deep, dark place. You're blindfolded with no light whatsoever, and yet you keep walking. Well, the ego can't do that. Spirit can, because the spirit sees the light no matter what. In this phase, you start to be able to make the distinction. Oh, that thing happened to me, but it turns out that there's light in it. And now you can philosophize. Is there a point? Is there a meaning to this madness? Absolutely there is. It's what we in New Eyes call organized chaos. There always was a method to the madness, and it's because the spirit, the phoenix, is going to rise up out of the ashes. Here's where we begin to get rid of the unhealthy emotions that we have. Therapy sometimes shows up here, right? How can I work on my self-improvement? How can I release this toxic energy? Not at another human being, right? What can I do, physical, mental, spiritual, to continue on and recognize, well, I'm gonna work on my physical self, but I have a spiritual self to work on as well, which flips us really nicely into 4, exploring. Because now you know you're 2 things. One of my favorite lines, Jesus in one of the Gnostic texts says, when you are 2, what will you do? He's talking about this phase. Once you realize you're a spiritual being and a physical being, now what? Just go spirit all the time, join a cult? No, that doesn't work. To go back into the physical doesn't work either. You're 2 things now. You're fully separated. Conjunction literally means, like how definitions work, conjunction is the action or instance of 2 or more events or things occurring at the same point in time or space. Well, welcome to conjunction junction, right? Here we are as spiritual beings realizing we're physical, or we're physical beings realizing we're spiritual. You're both. You're both. Have at it in the physical world. Keep doing your physical world stuff. Now spend some time on your spiritual development, but not the religion kind when it's done incorrectly, which is more physical stuff. Flesh counts for nothing after all. Spirit gives life. It means to practice the virtues and actually practice what Jesus taught. He gave almost no physical advice. Very little, and most of the advice he gave that seemed physical was metaphorical anyways, like casting your net to the right side of the boat, okay? That's great fishing advice if that's where the fish are. But he's again referring to getting to the spiritual side of our brain, which is on the right side, logical left and spirit on the right. The artistic side. Get over there on the right side. That's where you're going to find the spiritual things. Among many other things that he said, metaphors all over the place, you can see the difference in the physical and the spiritual. Now you're both. And this is the first phase that feels pretty good. I like to say, this is your freshman year. You've now got out of junior high, not as awkward anymore, and you see a path that's clear. You know the goal is graduation now. You've actually done something. You've got to your freshman year. And for the most part, they take it easy on you when you're a freshman, They don't expect you to be senior level yet, and you're in an exciting phase because you've done something, and you have a sense of peace, and you know the difference between the spirit and the ego. And now you know you're both. You also have this vague idea that I'm supposed to be working on one a lot more than I have. That's the spiritual self. So the conjunction is the experience of 2 of these things happen at the same time. And well, here we are. This is the essence of one of my favorite bits of Eastern wisdom. Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. Okay, great, you're enlightened now. Now what? You get that you're a spiritual being. Now what? You're not done. All enlightenment is you know the path. Now you have to walk the path. You get lost in the woods, you find a flashlight. The flashlight helps you get out of the woods. That's it. You still got to keep walking. Just because you figured this part out, you're not anywhere near done. At this part, you can see fairly clearly. You can see the light at the end of the tunnel. It might be way off there, but you know what you need to do. You have a goal to seek. I like to call it halftime because you're in the middle. It's halftime. And the good news is you're leading. In fact, the truth is, compared to the rest of the world, you're probably way ahead of a lot of people who still are or haven't even reached calcination because their lives are good, right? And they picked the right prophet, and I'm going to heaven because I picked the right guy. The crucifixion hasn't even happened yet. Wait till you get tested. Or as Paul says, I am crucified with Christ as he actually was. But while he was alive, he taught that too. Oh, you're going to go through it. So your life is good until it isn't, right? You're going to suffer, says the Buddha, and that's what that happens. Well, this phase, you're like, oh, man, I've got through that. And you feel a little good about that. That's okay. It's not ego. It's not cocky. You just got to a phase that you know everyone's eventually going to get to. Jesus says, congratulations to the one who stands at the beginning and he sees the end. Well, when you're here, you get to that phase, you're like, all right, I know what I need to do. They're taking it on easy on me now. I feel confident that I understand what I need to do, and that's good. And that's part of what enlightenment is. To me, this is the true meaning of religion. Religion means, in its literal origin, is to reconnect. And now that you know you're a spiritual being, your job is to reconnect with the spirit all the time so that you're centered all the time. And that's the true meaning of religion, not following a bunch of rules. Very clearly illustrated by Jesus himself, who came to fulfill the law and not live by the physical law. He did not say the 10 commandments. He said to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. That's the commandment. Along with another that's like it, to love another as oneself, including loving your enemies. All right, where does he give behavioral advice in there? Now, what he did say is to love with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And that's this phase again. Man, I got to pull that off? Now, you know what you need to do. You're conjunctioning, but it's exploring. Keep doing your physical stuff. Go get a degree, go get a new job, new relationship, or old relationship. Leave one. It doesn't matter. The spiritual self has to develop alongside this. So this stage is comfortable, but don't get too comfy. Anytime we get complacent, we can regress. The experience is actual, it's energetically, and you could start sliding back in, and then more adversities show up again. And then it quickly centers you. Okay, I got to get back to where I was. Don't be in like 8th grade and forget 1 + 1 = 2. They're going to send you back to remedial math or whatever. Don't forget some of the things that you learned back here, or you will slide back. You want to work with alchemy and not have it force you through it. Okay, this is going to happen. These next stages, especially this one, talk about this one for hours. It's going to happen to you. You either work with it or you let it force you. Path of light, path of pain. And so, you know who you are in this phase. You understand that what Jesus was doing was not shielding us from suffering. So many people think of that with Christianity again. Jesus is going to take away all my pain. Well, actually he is if you do it the way he did it too. The realization and the awakening and the born again and all of that. You're going to go through the pain though. It can't be avoided. He doesn't shield you from the pain. He guides you through it like a shepherd. This is how you get through the pain. You want to get through the pain quicker? Love each other. Everything. And that'll speed it up, among other things, but that's a big part of it, and you get that in the conjunction phase. Here's where it says in the Quran, Surah 55:19, He, Allah or God, has given freedom to 2 great bodies of water so that they might meet. So this is in the Quran. It's alchemy. He has given freedom to the 2 great bodies of water. What are the 2 great bodies of the water? The higher self and the lower self. The ego mind and the spirit mind. Those are 2 great bodies of water. The emotions that come with physical world, the emotions that come with spiritual world, 2 great bodies of water. And He has helped give you the freedom. You now see a separation. Now you're in conjunction. Again, every philosophy points to this. And now you have the awareness. Now the goal comes next. And this part, again, fermentation can go forever. I think I've been stuck in fermentation for 5 lifetimes. That's what it feels like, at least. This particular phase, we're going to follow the Latin. The word fermentation comes from the Latin word fermentare, meaning to leaven. To make bread rise, you need a leavening agent to wake up. Wake up. Buddha means wake up. To wake up the dry yeast by mixing it with water. The yeast then starts eating the sugar in the dough, eating in quotes, and off-gassing, like that word, off-gassing alcohol. You know what another word for alcohol is? Spirits. See, this is the phase the spirit actually starts getting released. All this was just a journey towards maturity. And now you're getting into the fermentation phase, and you need the leaven. So here's another word for leaven. Leaven, typically yeast, that is used in dough to make it rise. Leaven is there to make it rise. That's what leaven does. It makes it rise. Well, guess what the leaven part of your life is? The ego. It always was there for a purpose. And all the experiences that we have, it's leavening. And so why do you have traffic? What do you think that's there for? And the ego. What does it make you do? It forces you to rise. You know, why do you have negative experiences? Why do you have resistance? Why do you have people telling you that you're bad or you'll never be any good or we don't like your type around here and all that stuff? It's leavening. It makes you rise. Leaven is also another definition, a pervasive influence that modifies something and transforms it for the better. Okay? And so again, the ego, which was really the bane of our existence and the causing of all of our pain, turns out to be pretty important because it's going to force you to look at something else. In Latin, leaven comes from levamen, which literally means relief or raising, or from levere, to lift. Okay? Well, guess what Jesus says specifically? Matthew 13:33. The kingdom of heaven is like leaven that a woman took and hid in 3 measures of flour till it was all leavened. I'm not a baker, so I have no idea what that means in terms of baking. But I do know that it was hidden. The kingdom of heaven is like leaven. Wow. Which means you have to go through this phase. It's a difficult phase. It's a challenging phase. The ego is right there for you, helping you, guiding you in its way with your emotional state every step of the way. And it's hidden until it was leavened, until it's raised. You will stay stuck in this phase until you're raised, okay? Doesn't that put a little different spin on what resurrection means? Well, I don't doubt the Jesus resurrection story one bit, but it's all metaphorical. Do you think you have to physically die on a cross like him to be resurrected like him? No. But you do have to understand what he did. And what he did for us, as he said, pick up your cross and carry it. You're going to get leavened, leveled, then leavened. You're going to go through this phase. You're going to go through a crucifixion. You're going to go through a resurrection. And the rising happens. That's the resurrection right there. So, it's a challenging phase because when you consume fermented food, these things can happen to you. Bloating, headaches, migraines, histamine intolerance, allergies, illness, infections, antibiotic resistance. This is all when you eat fermented food. Okay? So guess what happens to you in this phase? Spiritually speaking, bloated. Anybody ever feel bloated? Headaches, migraines, allergies, infections, disease. I mean, all sorts of wild things can happen to you. None of it bad. You're being leavened. You're being risen from the physical self, maybe through a bunch of messy physical things, into the spiritual self. This includes all our diseases and all of our negative experiences, all of it. And now you're being tested, and this is my probably favorite part of all this. You're being tested in a less intense way. Here it was intense. They call it the fire for a reason. Here's the slow burn. It's now on simmer. There it's striking. It happens to you and you get beat down. But here it's simmering. And the goal is to let yourself be the simmer, right? To let yourself be the fire. To trust so much that you allow yourself to keep developing with focus. You know, we just did the Eightfold Path. With the focus and the concentration that the Buddha talks about to stay on your spiritual path. And that requires a slow burn, right? Does it feel good? Not really. It's sort of like sunburn. But is it somehow good for you? Yes, it is. Don't forget. Don't stop trusting. It's a slow burn that you are now. You're part of it. The light's now in you. And it burns from inside you now. Oh, it can be really annoying. And it's when all your issues, one of my favorite books, Oneness, talks about how every one of your issues is going to be brought to the surface. And as it's brought to the surface, you have a chance to deal with it. You're not going to be able to tuck anything away. It's not going to be hidden. In order to get to the kingdom of heaven, you're going to have no issues whatsoever. You're going to move past all of it eventually. But if we try to hide some stuff, we're going to keep fermenting. So the word I used was implore, because now you're a sophomore. It's time to get mature. And we got to work on that. We have to embrace the teachings and actually do them. And not make it like Sunday school in which, we're just singing these little songs about how Jesus did all of it. Jesus specifically said you have to do it. The Buddha, same thing. Believing in him helps inspire me to go do the good work. Remember, this is called the great work. And so the fermentation phase, you can stay stuck there. It is low heat. It's a test of your patience and your persistence. Did you really mean what you wanted to do? Did you really want to go through this? Or do you want to go back to ego land? You want to go back to try to control the physical world? Maybe if we fix the physical world, people will feel better. People are trying that forever. We have arguments going on throughout the world for thousands of years because people aren't just doing their own process. We're going to talk about that again in a second. This is the part in which the corruptible, the physical, the ego starts to die, and in its place comes the spirit. Automatically by default. You've not done anything but put yourself in position to let this happen naturally. It's the same exact thing as a rose releasing a fragrance when it blooms. You release the spirit automatically. You get cocky about it? I did this. Jesus said nothing like that. He said, I'm doing nothing. I'm just doing what my Father's telling me to do. And he's so humble. You guys can do greater works than me. Wow. You're also the light of the world. I'm the light, you're the light. We're all the light. How cool is that? He was not walking around, you must worship me, right? And when we focus on that, we're missing the point. You must do it too, is what he said. A lot of grief can happen here. A lot of adversity in many different ways, but it's a slow burn. You now have some maturity about you. You can handle it. And this one can easily last the longest period of time. Like I said, many cycles, maybe many lifetimes. But the more you stay focused, the quicker it can go. So I had a personal experience. It was last year where I had a meditation in which I was just brought into a meditation and there was a flame there and it was just a candle with a flame, completely ordinary, and it invited me in. I'm like, all right, Mr. Candle, I'll come into your flame. And I went into it and it just whispered into my ear. It's just a meditation, so don't judge it. I'm in it and the candle whispers to me, resentments and regrets. And then I came out of it. I knew exactly what it meant, like 100%. I could spend, and I do, hours and hours, if not weeks and years and decades, talking to people about the physics and explaining all the different spiritual things as I do, right? Or make it simple. We just have to let go of resentments and regrets. Detach from them, if you will. You don't want to die with any resentments and regrets. Simple, right? That's the simple way of looking at it. And I had that experience, and I remember going, yeah, I don't have to say all that other stuff. I just have to let things go. It's that simple. Or you can do it a complicated way, whatever you want. But that's our goal. This is the phase of letting go of resentments and regrets. The old is dying. The new, the rebirth, the born again phase is coming to you. It's soon. It's these two phases, okay? But we got to let go of resentments and regrets. And then therapeutically, you challenge yourself. Am I holding on to something? Do I wish that something didn't happen, or did I learn from it? Because if you didn't learn from it, you're still in calcination and in dissolution. But once you learn from it, you've grown. Now you're more mature. Luke 2:52, Jesus grew in stature and in favor with God and man. How is Jesus growing in stature with God if he was already God? That doesn't make any sense, right? Well, it's because Jesus was going through a process too. Jesus was sinless because he knew this was the process. He knew he was going to end up the divine. He knew that, so he was sinless. Once you know that this is your process too, you're not sinning either. You know it's the goal. It's not about physical world stuff, it's spiritual stuff, right? This is the phase in which you can speed up your process, better than anything else really, with like vision quests, for example. Like Eat, Pray, Love. Go to another country, immerse yourself in another country, or go work on another culture. Perhaps watch the other political party's TV show. See if you can not get your blood pressure up, right? Here you could go to like Sedona, Arizona, and hang out in the vortex for a while, right? Go write some songs and sing them for the world or whatever. So many different things you can do. Go on an ayahuasca retreat, right? Pick something fairly radical. Greatly speed up your process. Go read the Quran. Go read the Dhammapada. Don't just settle for what you got taught. Break outside your little comfort zone. You can speed up the process. Free yourself from external stimulation by becoming really good at meditation and deep breathing skills and yoga and things the ego hates. I don't feel like stretching my body in all those weird positions. Shut up and do it, okay? The ego doesn't like it, but the spirit says thank you very much. And the spirit gets released because you do it, because the ego is being diminished. Embrace the pain and you win the game. No pain, no gain, right? That's this phase. Crucifixion comes first, right? What happened first with the crucifixion? Nails in the hands. Oh my gosh, that must have been terrible. What happened to the rest of Jesus? Long, slow process. He got calcinated up front. He had to endure that pain up front, but the rest of it was the long, slow death. It's the long, slow burn we on. This is where I came across the teachings that drugs got to stop here. You know what? You don't do anything bad ever, but no one can use substances to push them over the top. You have to use your own juice. And that's in this phase. Get off the drugs by this point, okay? Now, you're not bad if you do, but you're not going to have true consciousness exploration while you're still using substances. It's why I like to talk about Timothy Leary and Allen Ginsberg and those guys going to the Buddhist monks and talking about consciousness raising. And the Buddhists heard them talk about, their desire to help expand consciousness. And the Buddhist said to them, "Oh, we're working on expanding consciousness too. We just don't need drugs." And that's the phase you find yourself in, okay? You're not bad if you do them. But once you get here, it's a good idea to drop it, because these next two phases coming up are where the real gold is. So keys in here include breath work, meditation, raising your vibration, practicing virtue, all that kind of stuff. Your inner demons are being conquered. You're putting everything to rest that way. You're applying your personal will. It's tithing. Tithing isn't about giving money to church. Tithing is about committing 10% of your day to spiritual development. 10% of your day, that's an hour, right? Do that, now you got good spiritual muscles. And this leads us to James 1:12, in which we are told, "Blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial, for when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life, for which God has promised to those who love him." So, you just withstood the test, and you get to this phase. I don't really like the word test, but it's throughout the Bible. But once you pass the test and you get into these two phases, you receive the crown of life. And God has promised that to you. However you want to take that to mean, it's a guarantee. It's going to happen. That rose seed is going to be a rose bush. That's what it's designed to do. You're going to get through these phases. And when I implore you, there's that word, you have to implore yourself, I want to get there. You want to have that passion, that fire to get to that phase. Revelation 2:17, "He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches." Not man, not the ego. What the Spirit says to the churches. "To the one who conquers, I will give him some of the hidden manna, and I will give him a white stone." What do we say? The Philosopher stone? Here we go. "I'll give him a white stone with a new name written on it." On the stone, and that no one will know it except for the one who receives it. So it's a personal experience. This is in Revelation. "The one who has an ear, let him hear." Again, we're not talking about physical words. We're talking about spiritual teachings. If you have an ear to hear, you understand what I'm talking about. If you don't, you think it's all malarkey, right? But if you do, guess what? The one who conquers, what is that about? Let me read you one of my favorite Buddha lines at the very end here. Perfect timing for this. The Buddha in the Dhammapada says this exact thing. Oh, I've got it memorized. There we go. Nope. I thought I wrote it down somewhere. I have it memorized. Oh, there it is, from the Dhammapada. "The one who has conquered himself is a far greater hero than he who has defeated 1,000 times 1,000 men." To the one who has conquered himself, well, that's the Buddha, pretty much reading from Revelation, right? Or maybe Revelation taught Buddha. Does it matter? Aren't they both saying the exact same thing? "To the one who conquers," says the Buddha, "to the one who conquers," I think this is John, he wrote Revelation. "To the one who conquers, I will give him some hidden manna." Hidden, you don't get to see it. It's not physical. What's manna? Manna's food. Is it food to eat like a sandwich, or is it manna something that feeds the soul? Of course, it's soul food. "I'll give him a white stone." It's the Philosopher's stone. It's what we're talking about all along. I personally think, I'm going to do this at the end, that stone might have a physical thing to it, but that stone has a new name written on it. Why is it a new name? Because it ain't Steve. I'm not showing up in heaven like Norm from Cheers and everyone says, "Norm's here, Steve's here," okay? You're a new name. You're a spiritual name, whatever that might be. And you know that it's true, because now you are recognized by God. You're recognized by the universe, by infinity, if you will, your eternity. You know this is true. And can you tell it to anyone else? No. They have to go through the same process. And if you've had the process, like Ram Dass says, if you had the process, no one needs to explain it to you. If you haven't had the process, no one can explain it to you. You have to go through it. And here's the phase. Once you get through fermentation, this is revelation. Now we end up with the best two phases for many reasons, because now you're mature. Junior year, if you will. You're pretty close to the end. You know what you're doing. You're feeling pretty good about yourself. But it's a phase of maturity and mastery. You're in the born again phase. You're sort of like a toddler, though. You're definitely a spiritual being, but you want to keep working on it. This is Luke 2:52, Jesus growing in stature and favor with God. We're still refining now. We're refining it. I call it the the fine sandpaper. Instead of the coarse stuff, it's fine. You are now more receptive to influence of subtle energies. You're able to, this is empath stuff. And people who are empaths, it's very cheap. They're like 5.5, okay? Because empaths really feel it, but they're not fully in distillation, because they're still feeling it, but they're darn close. And that's sort of the challenge of what an empath is, to feel everybody else's energy and feel it so deeply. Wouldn't it be great if you just didn't care? Nobody doesn't care about anybody, right? You could be pre-calcination, right? Life's so much easier. And eventually you're going to get into this, and at some point you're going to go through empath. You actually have to have compassion for other people. Go figure. So you get into this phase, you're more receptive to influence. And entanglement, in Einstein science and all that, entanglement is the interconnectivity we all have. Now you're attuned to it. Gravity is a force. It exists. It exists for all of us. It exists all day long. Anybody lose their relation to gravity today and start floating? Did it always work? Well, entanglement has always worked. The vibrations, the subtle energies of other people has always been around you. Now you can feel it. We're going to do this next week with the final aspect of the Hermetic journey of what it means when Jesus took on the sins of the world. He picked up the vibrations of everyone. He felt the spirit of everyone, right? He also felt the ego. And he took it. And he took it physically and he took it spiritually. We'll do more of that later. But this is the phase that you're in. Oh boy, you can feel it now. But you know what to do with it. Now you can alchemize it, okay? Now you recognize, that person's still being calcinated. Oh, they're still stuck in dissolution. They haven't learned how to ignore the ego yet, right? Oh, they're just working through separation. You can now just make the distinction. Hurt people, right? Do hurt people who are hurting people get to distillation very easy? No. And so you can immediately identify, still in phases 1 and 2. Grade school, if you will. And maybe even pre-K, because they haven't had any adversity yet. Pretty easy to tell. Those are the ones that are yapping about other people, why their religion and their prophet's better than everyone else. They haven't even gone through the phases. You can identify that quite nicely right here. This is from the Emerald Tablet. It again descends to earth and revives the strengths of the superiors and the inferiors. What is the it? Well, it's the spiritual realm. It then descends into earth. It's also known in the Lord's Prayer as on earth as it is in heaven. We are now embodying the spirit in the physical. It's extremely empowering ultimately. The subtle energy, like water, as water condenses or gets denser, it becomes ice. Now the spirit becomes physical, and now you know what just happened to you. You are a spiritual form, and this is what coagulation is, you are now taking the spirit after you distilled it, and you're putting it in your physical form. And now you're living as a spiritual being. That's what this phase is. The spirit is now inside of you. Ongoing meditation, consciousness, breath work, working on integration, connecting to others, all of that stuff happens here. It's what I like to say. You are mature, so develop a rapport and be a mentor. I like my rhymes, what I'm like Dr. Seuss, right? So you have to do all these things during the restore phase. You're a spiritual being. It's why in Buddhism they say the first step of the process towards joy, which is what we all want, is harmony. You better learn how to love everyone, not just those you're friends with, but you have to get in harmony with everyone. Wow, that's a tall task, isn't it? And yet, here we are. That's the phase. That's the Luke 12:47 phase when Jesus says, to those who much has been given, much is expected. If you know your master's will and you don't make ready, you will receive a severe beating. And that happens to us. And we and if we don't do it right, we are going to regress. We're still good up there on the. So that's distillation, and that leads us closer to the end here. Here's the phase where we can manifest for real. I've been around the block many times. Go watch The Secret. Why does The Secret not work particularly well? Because people do it with the ego. You cannot manifest with the human ego. You can do it a little bit, but the odds are not very good. I can manifest a pizza pretty quickly, right? By just calling, I believe it's pretty easy to get a pizza. I could probably get my toppings too. I can manifest some things like, some possessions, maybe some relationships, maybe some job stuff, whatever. But we are not really good at manifesting, are we? Well, the manifesting isn't supposed to happen in the ego formation. That's trying to do the work of manifestation in these phases. Really hard to do. This phase, 6, is when we learn how to manifest for real. Because now you're doing what you're supposed to be doing it for the love and the betterment of all. Because if you're just trying to manifest for yourself, you're a selfish ego phase. But what if what you want to do is to manifest for the good of everybody, for the benefit of everybody, to love another as oneself? I want this for me as much as I want it for you. What if that's what you're doing? You get to this phase, now you're like, oh man, I want everyone to get it. Just like the Buddha talked about with right intention. I want everyone to get it. I want everyone to feel the peace of what happens when we get to this last phase, coagulation. And this is the best phase. Coagulation literally means the process or action of a liquid, especially blood, changing from a solid or changing to a solid or a semi-solid state. It's condensing back into matter. It's quite literally spirit with your awareness now in physical form. I'm not looking at bodies. I'm looking at energy. I'm looking at your souls right now or your spirit right now. Do we do that with the world? When you look at trees, you're looking at the energy of it? Or you're thinking, oh, look at the leaves and the branches. When you look at, traffic, are you thinking of spirit and like tests for patience? Or are you thinking of these damn cars in my way, right? When you think of adversities that you go through, cancer and disease, are you thinking of it as leavening? Oh, this is a chance for me to grow. Or are you thinking of it, this sucks and I wish I didn't have it? So the person who's coagulated goes, oh, I totally get it. Everything that I just went through brought me to this phase. It's the separating and recombining. Solve et coagula is to break apart that which you think you are, and then remember what you really are, and then reintroduce it. I know, as my wife is my witness, is when I got a little too spiritual, as C.S. Lewis says, don't be so heavenly bound you're no earthly good. Okay? We're not supposed to just go be spiritual and again join a cult. And you could go too far in the spiritual direction. I don't worry about anything. Okay? You're not so useful. What's the goal? You want to come back and be in spirit form and help others do it. It's literally to love another as oneself. And it's the exact point we're going to do in the last lecture next week, which is talking about how do we do this? How do we do when Jesus says, well, that's the next line coming up here. I'll save that for the end. This is the phase of perfection. Dzogchen in Buddhism is the great perfection. Ihsan in Islam is to live as if God is in the room with you and you'd be perfect. Siddhi in Hinduism is the great perfection, which you were born with. Matthew 5:48, Jesus says, be perfect. Be perfect, he says. Can you be perfect physically? No. But if you get through these phases, you're a rose bush now. You're perfect. Verse 29 in the Tao Te Ching says that you are a vessel of perfection. That's a whole lot of perfect going on. And that's this phase. You have to go through all of that to get this phase. In Buddhism, it's called the rainbow body. It emerges energetically. You really can't see it, but you can feel it. The rainbow body. It's beautiful. They have pictures all over it. In many ways, it's the halo that you see on top of old Christian imagery and other philosophies too. The energy is now coming off the person. It's like a rainbow in that regard. It's the perfected self. It's the fully resurrected self. You've achieved immortality. You've now beaten death, like Jesus taught with the crucifixion, because you realize you were the light. You know, Genesis, in the beginning, God said, let there be light, and you're made out of light, and now you fully realize that I'm a light being. I'm not a physical being. You have to keep working on this again and again and again, because if you lose it again, it's like getting great physical shape and then just eating donuts for breakfast. Don't get lazy. You want to stay on point so you can stay in this phase. You get in that lake, you want to stay in that lake. Ram Dass says the only way to help each other is to heal yourself. All this work we're trying to do to help each other, but if we're stuck in these phases, we're not really helping each other. We're sort of like the blind leading the blind. You get into this phase, now you can really help because your energy is going to be right. It's just going to come off of you naturally. You won't take credit for it either. And now the words make sense all of a sudden in this phase. But back here, you know, what happens when a bunch of people are being calcinated or trying to argue? Well, this is what you need to do. Okay, good luck. The Buddha says you are Buddha. Well, here we go. You realize that now. Okay, I guess that's true. I am Buddha. And he's the one that says now you've conquered yourself. So the glory of alchemy ultimately, the great work is to fulfill your ultimate potential. Not only do you have the great satisfaction of doing the work and finding your spiritual self, you can manifest it physically. This is the blessing and the great thing that Jesus actually did, is he went through the physical part, showed us the spiritual part, and then he died at 33. In the Course in Miracles, he calls it his contribution. Talk about humble. That's what I did. You know, what are you guys going to do? That's bringing your gift to the altar. He died at 33. What do we get to do? You get to have the same spirit, the same Christ that awoke in him in you. And now you get to live the rest of your life that way. When you die, you're good to go. You won't even worry about it when you go to die. But can you imagine if Jesus got to live from age 33 on? Well, the Buddha sort of got to do that. He died at 81 or 82. Filled with the Spirit the whole time. Wouldn't you want to live life on earth, on earth as it is in heaven with the Spirit? That is what Jesus showed us the way to. So we end with this, and again, this is how we're going to do the last part of this next lecture. Matthew 7:3-5. Why do you see the speck in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when there's still a log in your own eye? You hypocrite. I love it when Jesus gets aggressive. You hypocrite. First take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. So taking the log out of your own eye is getting to this phase, right? Stop being blinded by the physical. See the world as spiritual. Live that way. Coagulate. Now you are spirit. You're a spiritual being having a physical experience. And then the next step is the final step for anyone that's interested in this process. And it is to love another as oneself. And its right intention from the Buddhist Eightfold Path is to help others do it. Is now that you've got the log out of your own eye, you can see clearly, you'll have the right energy, the right touch, the Midas touch like we talked about before. And now you can facilitate others actually learning how to see the world correctly. Okay? That's what we'll do next lecture. Thank you. What did it take, an hour and a half or something? We got deep in there. But thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.